We are excited to add to this year's conference by answering some of the questions that you all as attendees have submitted to us. So we put out to everyone, if you had any friendship coaching questions that you'd like answered. We all need a counselor, if we're being honest. And so some of these, I even submitted a question. So if we're going to be answering some of your questions and then just talking and just having fun. So the first question that I'm going to ask is for you, Shannon. It says, friendships often feel fleeting or one-sided. How do I build lasting friendships where both people equally invest?
Well, my short answer is you can't. I don't know that you can. I mean, if you're looking for equality and you want everything to be equally measured and make sure everybody's investing exactly the same and it feels, fair, I don't know that that's possible. I have a book called Control Girl, and I have struggled with wanting things to feel more like I am, like you said, I'm doing all the work in this friendship. And I remember actually reaching out to a friend and saying, I feel like I am super vulnerable with you. I share these really hard, painful things, and I don't feel this reciprocation. And so we had a good conversation about that. I think that's appropriate and wise to say, this feels lopsided. But you know what that did is it gave her an opportunity to respond and say, you don't know, if I open up, she would often call me on her way to work, and she's like, if I open up and call and share about these things, I will be a mess. I won't be able to finish my work day. And so it was it just helped give me an understanding of where she was coming from.
Thank you. With the word, there was the word equal in there, I want to make sure everything's equal. I was just reminded of Jesus. Philippians 2 says that he did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped. That's a measuring word, equal, right? And so it's not like he's gripping his measuring cup and making sure everybody is aware that he measures up to God and, everything's fair. He emptied himself. He just wasn't investing in making sure everything felt equal. He was focused on the spout. He poured his life out, and he invites us to be that kind of friend. And if that's you in a friendship where you're the giver and somebody else is a taker, I just want you to know that is what greatness looks like in the kingdom of God. The servant is the greatest.
What stood out to me in that question was lasting. And so I think sometimes I have learned through the years that friendships are seasonal. I had, when my kids were younger and more of the moms were staying home, we got together more, and that just seemed to be our rhythm. And so when life changes, seasons change, and sometimes friendships do. And it doesn't mean necessarily that anything went wrong. It just meant that life happened. And so I don't know what your all's thoughts on that are, but lasting is a difficult thing,
Yeah, you go. I think, if you have a lifelong friend, that is such a gift and such a treasure. But again, it's not something you can control. It's a gift from the Lord that you receive. You're the recipient, and you receive that gift, but you can't demand it.
Maybe you don't even know who I am, but I'm just up here.
This is Laurie. She will be speaking later.
After this, but I would just say that, and I could say this about almost all the questions, is I'm a real initiator when it comes to friendship, and I'm very intentional, and it doesn't mean you stalk the person. I mean, obviously there's a limit to that, but I will tell you that I have some lifelong friendships from high school, and I'm old, and it's been intentional that I've had to do that because your life stages go through so many different. I have one of my best friends from college. She had 4 kids right out of college, and you'll hear my story. It was very different than that. So sometimes you have to be intentional. If you found someone that is special to you and you have that, I would just encourage you to keep at it, keep pursuing that friendship, because it really is worth it in the end.
I also think taking the mindset as the initiator is that if you are in a season where maybe you have more to give, you're still receiving the benefits back. If you're the one that's initiating the walks with a friend, you're still enjoying the conversation and you're getting that life-giving breath of fresh air that you needed in your friends. So even if you're the initiator, if you can sometimes think, instead of putting on yourself of, I'm always the one reaching out. It's like, but when I do reach out, I'm also receiving the benefits too.
I just would add just one more little thing to that is like, some of us God gave us the gift of initiation, right? Like he put that in our measuring cup. And so if that's you, then go ahead and pour that out. Like be the initiator, be the one who is always like, let's go for a walk, let's go for coffee. That's good.
I do think that friendships also have a lot to do with our personalities. And like you're saying, whether you're the initiator or the outgoing one or the reserved one, opposites attract sometimes. And so if you're the initiator, you might be initiating someone who doesn't have that in their personality. So, Laurie, this question is for you. Does age matter in friendship? And how can we bridge generational gaps to build connections across different life stages?
Well, Kelly, funny you would ask that question because that is part of what I'm going to be speaking about after. But I would say absolutely we need people from different age ranges in our lives. It is so enriching. I always say to people, try to find someone older and younger that you are in relationship with, that you can glean from. And it's not just if you're the older one. As you know, if you've ever been a mentor, you get so much from that relationship. It's not just that they're pouring into you, but you are really giving to each other. And I hope to make that a little more clear when I speak. But also finding the people that are younger than you and not just assuming because you're old that they don't want to be with you, because we need older people in our lives. That is so huge in Christian community. You need, as much as I know there are some teenagers and just in their 20s in this room going, I'm not sure I really need old people in my life. But I promise you, as you get older, you will see the value of having someone just a little bit ahead in the journey who can speak into your life, all the things that are coming. And that is a gift we have for each other in the Christian community. So I think it's a huge enrichment to have people of different generations.
My Bible study group is actually a community group, and some of them are here today. And so we have people from all different ages, from different denominations. I'm the youngest. I think the oldest might be early 80s, maybe. And so anyway, it's just nice to have different perspectives. And sometimes when one of the younger ones is maybe complaining about some of the things that are going on, the older ones are like, this too will pass. So I don't know. I find that it's very nice to have different perspectives from different age groups.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Bailey, this question was submitted, and this is yours. My time is very limited due to work, family, and caregiving. How can I realistically prioritize and maintain meaningful friendships despite my busy schedule and limited resources?
That feels all too real. I'm like, did I submit this question? Yes, we all know shared experience, like shared time, is so important in building meaningful relationships. And as we get older, yes, we're finding ourselves less and less spending time amongst good friends. There is this research out of the University of Kansas that they found that to go from meeting someone, so you're like, hey, I'm so-and-so, nice to meet you, to feeling like you're really good friends, it takes 200 social hours, 200. And I read that and I'm like, oh my gosh, how are we gonna fit that into our lives? That's impossible. Makes sense why the playground days we had good buddies, because you spent 8 hours a day with people. And now as adults, you're like, I hope I can fit in 1 hour a week. And that would take me a lifetime. And what's interesting is that a couple years later, the same researcher came back and he said, oh wait, side note, a little asterisk star. It's not so much the hours you spend with people, it's what you do with the time you have. And so he found that when people use their time well, they had meaningful, deep, vulnerable conversations, that really kind of closed the gap between how much time you're, building up, putting in your bank, and allowed people who may not see each other as often to feel really connected and really close. And so my advice is always make your time count. So ask the good questions, really dive in. I say don't tiptoe on the outside of the pool when you want to be in the deep end. So make sure you jump in and get right to the point of what you really want to know about the heart of the person. So don't be afraid to kind of ask the tougher questions.
When you were saying 200 plus hours, I'm glad you qualified that. But because I was thinking, I don't know how many of y'all saw that viral video where the lady said, "Ain't nobody got time for that." I don't know. You should Google that. But anyway, so that's something we say in our house. And so that's what I could imagine many of you all sitting at the table was like, ain't nobody got time for that. So anyway, that's what came to my head. So I just spit it out there.
I just want to, go ahead, Shannon. I was just going to add that, you might think your schedule is too full for friendship, but you actually need some of the time that you might be spending on other things for friendship because of what it does for your soul. It actually gives you energy for the other things you're spending all your time with. And so I would invite you to maybe look at all the things you're doing, and especially if you're in Bailey's stage of life, where you've got so many kids at home and not a minute to yourself, but just be thinking like, I need to carve this out in my life because it gives me something for the other hours that I'm spending.
Well, and I feel like, Bailey, I listened to something that you put out a while back, and it was talking about a rhythm. And we may be already walking, but who could I invite to walk with me? Or, I might be making a 30-minute commute. Who could I call on my way? So things that you could cultivate a new rhythm to incorporate friends. Was that you that I heard say that? Did you share that? Yes. Okay. I thought so. Yes. I'm following you. I'm stalking you. Anyway, so the next question goes back to Shannon. So sometimes I feel left out within my friend group. How can I address this feeling without making things awkward but still feel genuinely included?
Yeah, I think piggybacking on what Laurie said, be the initiator in that conversation. Like if, I remember hearing that a couple of my friends got together without me, and I was like, I'm the one who introduced you. It feels like, gosh, that's kind of hard, but then, I think that recognizing that's okay. I want for them to have genuine friendships, and even if you're thinking about your family, different generations, I want my kids to get together without me, right? They're adults now, and I want, I want for me to get together with my cousins, and the aunts don't have to be there. Do you know what I'm saying? And so having the freedom that there are ways that people are going to connect differently than they do with you. But if you are always being excluded, I don't think that's wrong to say, excuse me, I feel hurt, I feel a little bit left out. But I think if you're going to do that, if you're going to step into sharing those hurt feelings, make sure that you don't come in, this is what people don't respond to, is you are always, and this, this sort of you're superior and you're condescending and you're looking down and you're telling them how they're doing it wrong. They're not going to respond well to that. And so I think if you can humble your heart before the Lord and go and say, you know what, this is hurtful. It takes a little more humility to say, I'm hurting, than you're wrong. And so if you can come with a heart that is hurting and share, you know what, I just feel like when you guys pair off and talk without me, and I'm not, I feel a little bit excluded. I just wanted to share that with you because I know that you do love me, and I know I just want to give you an opportunity to respond to that. But ultimately, I think those things with our heart, like I was kind of saying earlier, we need our time with Jesus to settle a lot of those things that our friends cannot settle for us. And so making sure that our heart is steady with him before, but then, I think initiate and make connections, vulnerable connections, saying this is hard for me. What would you guys add?
Well, I love what you said, and I would just say, because my mom was a therapist, that beginning all of those kind of confrontational conversations with I feel statements, if you can just have that in your brain, I feel, instead of you are, you're doing, I think that's really helpful. But I would also say that I went through something, I still remember it. My 8th grade year, I had a best friend and we did everything together, and I almost did nothing with anybody else. And freshman year, she found another friend and was doing some things with that friend, and I just remember for one day being home going, I'm all alone and I have no friends, and then all of a sudden I was like, there's a few other people around. I could make some other friends right now. This is an opportunity. And, I still remember that now. And so I think back to that, and I think sometimes we have to look at a situation like that, if you've got that in your life, and go, you know what, there's a whole, look at this room right now. There are always people to meet and people around you. And maybe it's time that God has a new friend for you. So,
You're going to add something?
I just wanted to add too, like, when we have favoritism, like I prefer this friend over that one. Jesus doesn't see people that way. Like every single woman in this room is precious to him, created in God's image, worth spending his life, giving his life for. And so I agree with you. When we're in a situation where we're feeling excluded or lonely, perhaps it's time to focus back on the spout, you know? Who can I invest in? How can I pour my life out? And again, you know, I keep bringing it back, but to comparison, that's just where my heart is right now. But when you tip that measuring cup, those lines, they go away. Like you've got this me-free perspective where it's not just all about you.
And it's not what you're saying so much as how you say it. So, you know, I went to a marriage conference once where they talked about, and it was also not just for marriage, but friendships, but for your parenting, you know. When you start a statement with, you never, you always, these broad brush statements, it causes the other person to be on defense. And so it's fine to say, I feel lonely or left out, but it's different if you say, you always leave me out. You know what I mean? That it's not as received as well. So, well, the next question is actually for Laurie. And so it says, when friendships drift apart, how do I know when to reach out and to try to reconnect, and when it's better just to let it go?
well, I will say that I had a very, very close friend, a best friend. I was in her wedding and everything, so it was very painful for me when that friendship took a turn. And one of the things that I learned in that process is that you can only do so much and not be pushing in on that person's freedom, because God doesn't even push his way into our life. We have to invite him into our life to have a relationship with him. He loves us and wants us. And so as much as you want this friendship to work out, you know, the other person is part of that equation, and you have to honor that in that. And sometimes people need space, and sometimes a friendship changes, and that's a grieving process. But as I said, there's other people in the world. Now, do I think you should not say anything when you get into a conflict or something happens in your friendship? Absolutely not. I think communication is huge. I think you should, you know, when it's possible, try to communicate and hear also what the other person is saying and what they're feeling. But to go to that person and then just have an open hand and be willing to allow both of you to decide where this relationship is going to go. I mean, it's kind of weird, but it's a little bit like dating, you know, friendship. It's not exactly like dating, but you know, we don't stalk each other, pursue, you know. I mean, you know how you feel if a guy does that versus, you know, just that sort of freedom of both people in the relationship. So those are just a couple thoughts I had.
Yeah, and I also think, at least this is true for me, is I have a lot of shame about the relationships that have grown apart, and I did not reach back out. And I feel like a lot of times later on we can beat ourselves up. If only I would have, you know, texted on their birthday, and then we wouldn't have gone so long without talking, or if only I would have done X, Y, Z, and then maybe I'd still be connected with them. And I also think there just needs to be like permission that if the friendship naturally just parted ways, like that's okay. It's okay that you guys went and did different things and you live in different places and you're investing in different communities. I like what Laurie said, though, is if there's a conversation that needs to happen, like it should happen, but also just wanting to flip it around too of like, if it was its time and it lived and it has now ended, like there's just no shame in feeling like you didn't do enough to keep it alive. It's just what the Lord wanted to use it for in that particular time.
I think there's a Dr. Seuss quote that says, don't be sad because it's over, be glad because it happened. And so I think that applies to a lot of different things. It was actually in my youngest daughter's school, painted on the wall. So anyway, that's what came to my mind.
Yeah, I would add this may be a little different than the question was asking, but when somebody has really shut you out, you know, like, and there's a reason behind it. It's not just you've drifted. I actually had that happen where someone just shut me out and wouldn't talk to me. And so there was not opportunity to have this, you know, they were like, I just don't want to hash it out. I just don't want to hash it out. And I'm like, well, oh, you're silencing me. And so I had to wait on the Lord in that time. And I think, I agree with you. It has to be reciprocal. And so I was crying out to the Lord, and I encourage you to do that. If you're waiting on a situation, that's where our eyes are lifted to the Lord, is when we're in a painful situation and when we're waiting and it's taking too long. That's where we find God to be faithful, to keep his promises to us in that waiting stretch. And, the end of that story is that God moved in a way and caused there to be this understanding, and we were able to have a conversation, and it was like really a miracle that I see God moving in that, and it was nothing that I could have done. Really, these things are out of our control, but they're not out of God's control. So keep waiting on him, keep looking to him. I know it's so painful and so hard, but he is with you in the waiting.
I had a friend share with me once that, even marriages go through seasons where you're closer than others. And so, and when you're further apart, you remember those times when you were closer together, and it draws you back in, and you just kind of do that. So that's what I was thinking about as you were sharing that sometimes happens. But the next question is for Bailey. So I feel nervous making new friends and worry about seeming awkward or not knowing what to say. Do you have practical tips or conversation starters to help me overcome this anxiety?
Oh yes, I love the practicals. This is an area of weakness for me. What I would do for the longest time is I would actually prep questions ahead of time. So I'd think about the friend I was going to see, and I would write it down on paper, and I'd stick it in my purse, and I'd glance at it, just because sometimes I would get tongue-tied, or I wouldn't know how to keep the conversation moving. And also, I would leave conversations and be, oh my gosh, I completely forgot to ask the one thing I actually wanted to talk to them about. So just spending 3 minutes, even in the car before you get out to go see a friend, making a note in your phone and say, here's 3 questions I'd like to ask, so that you kind of feel even just the warm-up. You've done the work, so it doesn't feel as hard to pull from. And I give myself pep talks all the time. I give myself one goal, especially in big social settings, where I'll say, okay, I'm about to step into this school event. This is a space that's really hard for me. I feel very left out. So my goal is to find one person that I'm going to say hi to. That's it. That's my goal. And I feel if I can just do that one thing, I haven't left, feeling sad about my life. So, so I make little goals for myself and give myself pep talks, and obviously prayer works. Some conversation starters, it's just adding that little tiny bit of creativity to the classic questions. So instead of, how are you? How's your day? It could just be what has been surprising about your day? What has kind of, what has brought you joy today? Also a great question is, what is your morning routine? I feel every time, every woman has some morning routine that they are just dying to tell someone about. So it's a good one.
What I love about what you just said, Bailey, is you're asking questions. When we're feeling awkward, we're focusing on ourselves. Right? We're thinking about what do I look like? How do I sound? What are they thinking of me? It's this me focus. But when you're asking questions, you're focusing on the other person. And I feel that is really helpful. It's that spout versus lines thing again. It's maybe if I'm feeling awkward, I can look for another person who looks like maybe they're feeling awkward. And if I focus on them, I'm not thinking about me anymore. It's really as simple as that. And looking around a room, for the person who isn't talking to anyone. There's your cue. They're not talking to anyone. They're not sitting with someone. They look a little uncomfortable. They're hanging back. Well, what if you walked toward them, and maybe it feels awkward at the beginning, but just ask a simple question hey, did you come here with anyone today? Or have you been here before? You can do this at church. You can do this at social gatherings, tell me what's your connection with this place, and just be curious about them. And if you will be curious about them, they will enjoy the conversation, and so will you.
Maybe I'll just interject that being a good listener is a great quality to have as a friend. It's surprising how little we listen to each other. We might even ask questions, and then somebody's answering the question, and you start talking to somebody else, and I'm sure we've all been in that situation where you're sharing your heart or you're sharing something and you don't really feel like the person is listening. So trying to really be interested in and asking the questions and waiting for the answer, I think, is really important too.
One of the things that I say to the children often, especially when they're leaving to go into school, which my older two are older, but they still deal with the same issues, but is just to look for the lonely and left out and make them feel included. And they can, if I start that sentence, they can finish it for me because they've heard it so many times. And it was actually in your last minute instructions when you come in today, look for the lonely and left out. Not everybody came with a circle of friends, but we are also leading Coffee and Connections. My husband and I do this on Sunday nights at 6 o'clock, which will also be an opportunity for you all to join us in our next steps that go out after the conference. But one of the things, if you're in that group, you know that we've been going through Becky Harling's book, How to Listen So People Will Talk. And so they say that 80% of a conversation is actually listening. And so we think it's the talking part, but it's really the listening part, and that's what I think is so hard for people to actively listen when you're talking, because sometimes when somebody's talking, you're thinking about, what can I say back? And so if you really listen, there's cues there for you to have something to say back, or to ask about. And so this, one of the last questions or chapters that we did was about asking people, like you said, questions, because if you're curious with them, then you will find connection. And so, Just that asking questions is what popped into my head, and actually it works in dating too. She used that. So calling all the single ladies, if you're dating a guy and you don't know what to say and guys are awkward, you could just ask them about them, and you will be not lacking for conversation, I'm sure. So anyway, that was what the advice was. So. Anyway, so back to Shannon. So another question that we had entered was, what's the best way to lovingly hold another Christian accountable when I see them making unhealthy or unwise choices?
Well, I think it is loving, right, to say something. I think our culture is not comfortable with that at all. When somebody's life is like they're going to destroy their life, we're kind of like, well, I don't want to judge, I don't want to invest in that, and I wouldn't want them to think I'm, looking down on them or something. But a loving friend is going to reach out and say something. I remember a situation where somebody in my life was getting divorced, and her husband wanted to reconcile, and I'm so for marriage, and so I wanted to say something, but my other friend said, oh, you cannot say anything. And I said to these other friends, like, but wait a second, do you agree that this divorce is going to be destructive? They're like, oh yeah, that's a terrible idea. And I'm like, but I'm the only one who's going to say something? So like, we have to be brave, like we have to get over that. It's really a selflessness in order to say, like, I see this, I'm concerned for you. But again, it's not this condescending superiority. Like, we have to approach that with humility. And if you can find a way of, like, even, like, don't just pretend like, you're humble and like you have problems too. Like, find a way where you have the similar sin pattern in your own life, right? And you can say, like, I have worked through this myself, and I see where you're headed with this. Can I help you? I think can I help you is a really powerful thing to say to a friend. How can I help you? What can I do to support you? I love you. I want you to follow Jesus with me. What can I do? Can I pray for you? Can I check in with you? Can I connect you? Can I help get you help? These are the sorts of things that I think we as friends can invest in each other.
There's a book called When Words Matter Most, and it talks about having these tough conversations with friends. And one thing I really like is they say something like, a good intention or a good thought of like, well, I should say something. It's just that. It's just a good intention. But being obedient to actually say something is where you actually want to get where you want to get to. So I know it can feel really scary, but I would like to believe that the Lord can plant the little seeds that hopefully, if it's not then, maybe later down the road, it will turn into something true for them.
I sometimes say that I have great intentions but not great follow-through, so something to think about.